refresh or think about.
Sorry.
Oh,
Got it.
it's cool. Oh, let's get the mouse. All right, cool. Anyway, if we have enough time, I'll go through some code examples, but of the concepts I'm talking about. We're not going to build anything from scratch. It's already skeleton stuff that either I got from GitHub or I built. Anyway, let's begin. History of the World Wide Web. Before the internet, people used to live in caves. That's just the funny slide of everyone. There you go. It's just one, I promise. All right. So before the internet, how did the internet look? I guess before the internet, there was internet. There was computer-to-computer connections, and they used to just be text-based. You were able to, so if you wanted to do one thing, there was like a program for the task, which would connect. Like you could send electronic mail. I think in 1985, FTP was developed, file transfer. There were Usenet groups, and there was also IRC chats, but they were all separate into their individual programs. And then came web browsers. And I'll just explain that a web browser is just an application software for accessing the internet or a local website if you have it running on your machine. And the way it works, it's when a user requests a web page from a particular website. So the web browser retrieves content response from the server and then displays it on your window. And it uses HTTP. Obviously, I put some web browsers that are common. And I would like to take a look at, so obviously there were web browsers back in the first days and people were creating, there were web developers. But it used to be very like primitive, hard-coded websites. And most of them, they use the tools that they had at hand, and one of them was using tables. That's how they structure their websites. And obviously after that came Flash sites. And I have an example. I guess Space Jam is still up. So if you want to take a look at a really old website and how it looked, I wanted to show you guys. This is what a website in 1996, 97 looked like. I don't know if you guys even remember being on the internet back then. But if you look at the source code, we could look at spec element. See. Oh. See. Specs, yeah. You can see what I'm talking about, that it was built using tables. It looks way different than sites nowadays that are dynamic. This is a static website, I would call it, and then I'll talk about it in the next slides. Let's see. So yeah, it uses tables, and that's how they were built, back in the day. And I kind of discussed the client-server model. And I think, so the client-server is basically what I discussed, that you have a client in the most basic terms, and you're connecting to a server via request, and then the server sends a response. So it is an architecture network setup. Let's see. And like I mentioned, what I showed was a static website. And a static website, it's basically when you go to it, it's already predetermined what you're gonna get. Nothing changes. So it's not too intricate or smart. I mean, they could get complex, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, you know what you're getting. Somebody from another country can go to the website and it'll get the same thing. So one of the concepts, yeah, it does not alter the files before they get displayed. And more or less, this is how it works. Static website. So you're the client, get the request to the server. The server then takes the request, fetches your files, creates your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then sends a response so the browser can read. And then voila, you get your website. On the other hand, now most of the websites nowadays are dynamic. So unlike the static websites, a dynamic website gets built when based on the request you're sending. Bob. And it's kind of like your Amazons. You know, you have your own car, Facebook. You obviously your Facebook is gonna look different than your friends. And I wanted to show an example of websites nowadays, I guess, modern websites. Oh, not that one. Let's see. Let's see this one. So Amazon, I went to this, just the Amazon site, and I looked at the page source, and as you can see, it looks way different, the code, because it's being built. I guess it's it has a lot more complexity to it than just showing you a list of things or what have you. More or less, that's a dynamic website, say. And as you can see, it's a little bit more complex, but you kind of get the gist of, you know, you have your client and the server. You still have to have a request and you still have to have a response. But what happens in the back end that you don't see, there's a lot more going on. And that's where frameworks kind of are created, so you can kind of automate or make these processes easier, so you don't have to worry about creating each specific one and then putting it all together every time you want to build something. I feel like the content management system would be already built. Like, I guess you could build one out of a framework. I mean, basing on it, but you still need a database, you know, and a management. You might not even need a browser for the content management, because you could, if you just care about, you know, it depends what you're trying to do. I guess the lines could be blurred, but framework, it's mostly from what I've done with it. You know, it's like building sites, or if you want to put in a database more extensively, I mean, I would just work on the database side and the back end. But yeah, there's a slight difference. So let's see. I guess I can kind of go over what this means here. So you get the first request, then, you know, the server gets it, then it sends it to either the web application handles it. So that's the backend. You don't get to see that. That's the server is running code. that determines what, like, let's say if you click on a link, it's gonna send it, it's gonna determine what it's gonna do based on the request. If there needs to be any change of the data, it does that. Loads the files, then it sends the response, more or less. All right, so now let's talk about frameworks. A web application framework is designed to support development lifecycle and make it more efficient. And it's for the purpose of a framework is to make coding easier, or I guess, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to create functionality for already existing things. And I guess, are frameworks needed? That's the question. Technically, no. You don't have to use a framework to develop a good site. You could just build it using Notepad. You could create the HTML, put it in tables, put images on it. All right, so I'm gonna go over some concepts as well, and you don't have to know fully 100% what they mean, but just know that in the context that they are used. So HTTP method, the most popular, obviously there are way more than these, but these are the most popular. HTTP methods are post, get, put, patch, and delete, as you can see. So what does that mean? So let's say you want to update content on a database using a web solution. So you're using your website. You want to change your name because you misspelled it, you edit it, or you want to create you want to add a new blog post. You have to add something new to the database. So all those things, you have to talk to the server via HTTP. And here I guess that's what I was talking about, is the concept of Crud. So a website basically wants to do, most of the websites wants to do something like this. Either you create, you read, you update, or delete in the database. I think, any questions with regards to Crud? I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, if you guys understand that it's basically you're trying to do something using your website. All right. So what do you need to, I guess, create websites? Well, first of all, you need a text editor. I personally recommend Visual Studio Code, simple, free, and you could use this. And also, I recommend getting yourself a version control, either Git, SVN. Git, I kind of just it's simple overview. A versioning control helps you update the code, update all your projects without having to create new files for everything. Let's say you want to make a simple change. All you have to do is create a new, I guess, branch and version of it. Instead of, and what it does is it handles that. So it's not going to copy everything on the hard drive, or it's going to manage it. So it's only going to change what needs to change, and it's going to keep a history of what was changed, something like that. So yeah, those are. Now, let's see, the LAMP stack, and I'm just going to give a brief overview of these frameworks that already exist and people develop on. So when they say the LAMP stack, or what they mean is Linux, Apache, MySql, and PHP. And so how it works is you'll have the browser and you get the GET request to the server. And the server has Linux running that has Apache server running. The database is MySql, and the code that ties everything together is PHP. I guess if you never heard of those things, it could get kind of confusing and overwhelming, but just know that we kind of all work together to bring out the site. And I guess I just have a how you would create a brand from zero. How do you create a website using the LAMP stack on Ubuntu? I guess here are the steps, but I am running on Windows, so I can't show you that. I could show you on the Windows. So LAMP stack on Windows. I used XAMPP, and I can give. Sorry, I'll explain it. So you download this software XAMPP. It's free. Then you use it to start your Apache server, and in it also has a MySql software running. So you also start that. Then you can open up your browser, and well, obviously you have to write the code in the website. Then you open up the browser and go to it. And I have a little example of something I built. So I'll show you. Let's see. So this is after me downloading XAMPP. I'll bring up the program, how it looks. Let me start it first. Let's see that. So the good thing is, if you have Windows or Linux or Mac, you know, most of these things you could write them on either or. You could use any stack. It's just personal preference. You either in Windows, I feel you kind of have to do a little. It's more graphical, but you have to download a program and run it kind of like this instead of using the command prompt and just setting your things that way. And so I did start the server. Check. And to get to it, leave. All you got to do localhost. All right, yes. So this is the server already running. And we have that. It's just a little template. Most of them come pre-built on the get-go. And the nice thing of using a framework is you could start creating something with things already built. So you can, before you set up the whole your project, instead of starting from zero, you can start from, you know, at a higher level by setting the parameters to be a certain way. So I stopped it. Let's see. I stopped it, and let's refresh just to see if anything happens. Yeah, obviously it's not running, see? So I'm just hitting the start on here. All right. So it's here. Oh yeah. At least for Windows, I know XAMPP puts the files in that folder path, and that is something I built. So how do you access that? You could access it by. Sorry, it's localhost. See. All right. There was an index.php on the folder path. As you can see. And that one basically redirects to this, the thing I built. All right. And there's just a simple example of the XAMPP. So in theory, that would be running on a Linux server. And when you go to that path, that is what it would load. Okay, going back. I feel so this one is not really a framework. You're kind of building it yourself. Now we're getting into more already pre-built frameworks. The MERN stack. So what it consists of, I did mention for this one, it's using Apache. I believe this one in MySql. And MySql is a relational database. So relational type, think of them like Excel spreadsheet tables. And I guess they are connected based on either keys, or if they're not connected, they're not connected. But and this one, MongoDB, they call it collections, and it's in theory it is a relational, but it's just it looks different and it's set up in different ways, but the concept's still the same. There's data there and you need to fetch it. The E for the MERN stack is Express.js, and it's an application framework for Node. And instead of writing, I guess, PHP and all those, you could write JavaScript. That's why this framework is popular. And obviously React in the front end. So you're adding a lot of more complexity to your websites instead of that simple table website that you had. But because you're adding way more things for the website to do, these are called, I believe, single page website, meaning it loads once and then you don't have to go using the URL for things to load. It's constantly talking to the server based on the things you do. This one?
How does Express stack?
So how does Express work?
Express.
So I guess I'm kind of jumping ahead. Let me see. So the model view controller, or it kind of, I guess I'll explain the model view controller. So these stacks, most of them are not all of them are like this. Some of them call it model view something else, but the concept is kind of similar. So the way they behave, these frameworks, is like a MVC, meaning they're separating tasks. And that was a good question. I think I can show you an example. Just looking at the code. Let's see. So what I mean by that, the separation of tasks, I'll kind of explain it in more detail. You have a view, you have a controller, and you have a model. And the view is basically your HTML that the user gets to see. That person sends the input, clicks on something, then he's going to go to another file, to the controller, that either manipulates the model, so either changes something on the data side, and then the view gets reloaded, or it just sends the view back. Or it's the controller is kind of like the brains of the operation. It handles what it's going to do next. and that they all work together to bring forth a website.
Is it
Good question. I'm not 100% sure I can answer that. It is kind of just an overview. So, but I can look into that.
is it kind of
And there's the other framework that's popular is Django. This one is a Python based, and within Python you can load the server, and it's all written Python. From what I understand. I personally use ASP.NET, so I'm more familiar with that. I can go in more detail with this. And so all these are softwares that you could use. I would say most of them work better in Linux or Mac. ASP is Windows, so I would assume it would work better on Windows. But even then, it's kind of a mess if you just jump in without knowing where to start. So ASP.NET has all these different web forms, MVC, web API that Windows kind of developed and then said, "Hey, that's a bad framework. Let's do it a better way." And then they just scrapped it and moved on to do a better framework. And I wanted to show you guys how simple it is to kind of get started using one of these frameworks by using your preferable, I guess, IDE.
Hello?
So I opened Visual Studio Community. It's free software for developing. I don't recommend it. Well, I mean, you could use it to create mostly everything, but I only recommend this one to use ASP.NET. Let's see. So let's create an MVC application. No. Like, you have double check. I'll set the authentication to yes, so it has something. And look at the code. And I wanted to create this to show you, kind of walk through the MVC model and how it kind of looks in the code, how it behaves. So you can kind of tell, hey, this is all the code that it created. Oh, and yeah, ASP is using C#, by the way. So see, the files are CS. And if you look at the, I think in the simple terms, MVC, it's not only doing that, it's probably doing a lot more things also, because there isn't only model view controller things. There's also, you know, setting properties. You could do bootstrap stuff, CSS, and all the front end, so the website looks a certain way. So it's a lot more intricate than a simple model view controller, but if you get that concept, you can kind of get what it's doing for the most part. Let's see, I'll start it so you can see what I mean. So I'll just click the play at the top. I moved it, let's see. And like the other example, I am just going in the local host and it's creating something. Obviously it's blank. It has this thing that already pre-built for you. So that's kind of like a good starting point that's what I use frameworks, or what I think frameworks are used for. Obviously, the harder, like the bigger your solution becomes, the more complex and the more code is going to grow. And whatever you start with, you have to think of, I guess, if you ever plan on making it bigger, what's the best process for doing that would be.
So, hello.
Check.
Hello.
Mentioned the model view controller. Phil, any questions?
Yes, hello. Hello.
Yeah, I'm just more comfortable working in it. That's I developed in that, so that's why. That's
Hello?
why, more or less. Sorry, go ahead. Your question.
Can you hear me?
Actually, I didn't jump straight to a framework. I learned web developing, I guess, I started working at a company that had old code in 2015, 2016. So I learned all the bad habits of creating websites using tables. And to me, that's, building websites, just HTML, hard coding it into the HTML, which is kind of bad practice. And I had to kind of unlearn that to, learn that there are way better ways to build websites now. And I think it's so, you could learn, a topic could be, like we could talk about every step of, I guess, I don't forget what it is, but like, they're so intricate, like the front end, there are frameworks just for that, like the React, Angular. It's strictly just for front end, and it's, you could learn, I could spend, like a whole talk just discussing it. There is also database, like I mentioned, I kind of just went out slide overview. There's no slides on the database side that I put. I think I should have, but that's another big part, because for the most part, if you go into an already existing organization, they're going to have their data already built. There's another thing you want to start thinking about when you create your website. Is it going to be, you're not going to create it just out of, you have to create it with data, with that in mind, with the data that you're going to be using in mind. So all that, you have to, not to scare anyone, because you should start it if you want to start developing stuff. Use the frameworks, play around with them. I recommend, downloading the things and starting. You could go to GitHub and get some example files just to run them. You don't have to strictly do it a certain way either. I didn't mention the MERN. There's like, you could, instead of using React, you could use Angular. You can mix and match. And if you like Python, you can use it to build websites. If you like C#, you can use that to build. You could also use Java. There's to build websites. So there's a lot of tools out there. That's what I'm trying to say. It's to create nowadays. People have created that. It's pretty cool. No, and there's probably a stack for that.
Hello.
Oh yeah, sorry. Oh, hold on.
The audio.
All right, let me double check.
Here. Hello.
And now it opened it here.
Hmm.
All right, let me just, because I can't read it. I don't know.
Or I can read it.
Is it 716? XAMPP has portable version where you can install and run off a USB. You can learn that, so you can learn that on the go. Oh, that's cool. I didn't even know that. See, now, yeah, that's cool.
Also. And then the other one. Wait.
I don't think they can hear you all. Oh, okay. Yeah. XKCD tech stack. I found chart of it here. Clear some stuff up for us. Okay, we can take a look what this stack is. Let me just double check. Okay. I can't see, so I should just open two things. I'll duplicate it. So I'll just duplicate it. Just see it. XKCD stack. What the broken down? Yeah, well, if you work at a company that has code already, because I know I worked at a company that they wanted to do, they were PHP, then I think they wanted to do Laravel. So there's a section for their Laravel, but they didn't change everything. So they still have their old stuff running concurrently with Laravel. I don't know how but to find any issues or errors, you have to dig through that thing. MongoDB Excel. Yeah, that's what I mean. Older version. I feel one of the good things to be a good developer is to read code. You're gonna be doing a lot of that. If you join a company, just read older code and just see the structure. And I feel like that's what the MVC kind of tried to help. Obviously, if it ever becomes such a big, much bigger than should, it gets confusing even as an MVC stack. But what I recommend, is it's sticking to the concepts. MVC was built by people that think in objects, so maybe they wanted to create object-oriented programming. So, and one of those concepts, you want to create less things that a function does. I don't know if that makes sense. It makes sense in my head. So let's say you just want to do a function that jumps. You don't want to create a function that does everything, jump, run. You want to create less things for a function to do. So if something breaks, you kind of know what's not working. Cool. Are there more questions?
Yes, there are. Hello.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, and yeah, even that has many ways of getting data. Like you could set the data via XML or JSON. You could do like you could write it on the URL the way they used to be. Like you write it on the URL, you say ID equals 7 or and then it would load. Yep. Yes, I feel like it's important to learn the concept. Don't just memorize what you want to do with the framework. It is good to know the concept. Yeah.
Having tools that comment shows that those tools. Sorry. So SQL Server. That whole end. So
Yeah, like I said, it gets more complex than but the concept of the request and you've received data is pretty much staying same.
that latest book. Right now.
Yeah, and I do develop in that at work, but at home when I want to test a framework or something, I develop in Visual Studio Code. That's also free. Well, if it was the XAMPP, it was MySQL. You could directly access the database, and it depends how you want to build it. If you want to create the data on the website, that then gets, or if is that. Oh, okay. Yes. So that would be the model that the framework would either has stop the server. So I guess the cool thing nowadays is most of them you don't have to create the Crud concept, of create, update. You don't have to before all of these the older days in PHP, and that's why it was unsecure, was because a lot of people wrote the SQL code in PHP. They just write a string, get me all the students, and then if you kind of know your way what's calling the function that's calling it, you could rewrite that to delete all data, but that's not good practice. So a lot of nowadays, obviously, there's a lot more protection, or you could create functions, you could create files, models that handle that for the most part. And I feel it depends what I'm working in, I guess. Like I said, if it's a collection, I kind of don't worry about the database because it's kind of like it's not an existing one that I'm using. If I'm developing, I don't think that far ahead. But if it's something that I need to connect to an existing database to mess around with the data there, then I'll probably use the tools still that I wouldn't. I haven't used JSON or XML, but I use I forget the name of Windows one, but for the model, I use that. Sorry.
So
Sure, yeah.
like that. Certain screens. Sorry, I would. Or certain.
Um, I don't know if certain industry, like at least from experience, I know it's from what I've seen. Most of the time, they have an older tool, and that it was built at the beginning, and it just kind of just grew that way. That's how a lot of it. But if we're creating something, for the most part, they use what the newer version of what they're used to, and from what I've seen, at least in my experience. So they're not gonna create a solution in Python if they're used their Windows shop. They just use a newer version of that framework. And I feel like for most of it depends too if you wanna use Linux server running it. I know I heard it's more reliable than having, a Windows server for server. So it depends on that too.
Does he use? They want to keep. What he said. So, and now. Same. Gaps. System. Sorry, nobody understood.
Hey, does anyone have any other questions online?
Everything.
We apologize, we don't have connection through
Oh,
the room, unfortunately. So that's why you can only
This
hear
one?
the speaker.
So right now, everybody focus on. This is in the browser. This is the client side. This is on your laptop. This runs there. These systems need to design an application to serve this out. And it sets up a communication back and forth. So HTML is script. Not full flow. So unless you design the system right, this is a vulnerable way. Transmission from laptop back to that server. So everything needs to be designed in such a way. Yes. Sure. There's things you can browser. Nature. Problem is most people learn how to write discrete parts. That's right. So most people that say, oh, I then it becomes hard how these serve work to serve out there.
and to give
That's where the learning.
And to give an example, so there is an existing tool at work, I guess, that somebody built maybe 5-7 years ago. So I couldn't open it to access, something broke and I couldn't open the solution. So that, either I could go downgrade Visual Studio to an older version, so then I can open the solution and kind of develop it there, try to fix it. Or we could figure out another way. So if you want to build, I think if you want to, the way I think of it, at least, you have a task that you want to accomplish, you want to do some work to the data, then I wouldn't use the existing tool. I would either create my own for that specific task that's newer, if it's an older code. Obviously, it depends your organization and what you're allowed to do, how much freedom. If you have to, stick to using the old software, you kind of have to downgrade and use the old version of Visual Studio, so then you can open it and develop it. Depends. Any other question? Thank you all.
I go there, but apparently they can only hear her.
Yeah,
Here.
it's here. I think.
Yeah,
Fine.
yeah,
This is not very.
right.
My bad.
No, that's actually the room is messed up. But for the ones that can hear us online, just wanted to say thank you. We're working to trying to get the feedback back to the room. So that's why we can hear you. So we apologize for that. And we'll try to get a mic also so you can hear the other participants asking questions. Yes. Oh, okay, yeah. So we will do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, unfortunately, but I'm glad that you were at least able to listen to Carlos, and Emily says thank you. So thank you. I just wanted to say, like, really, I mean, for the ones that have been speaker of the group, I know for a fact that really putting a talk is not very easy. It's a lot of work. Most of us have a full-time job, and I often see most of the speakers on the chat until very late once the day gets closer to the day of the talk. So I know it's a lot of work. So we really appreciate you doing this for us. And just so you know, for the ones that haven't been here before, we usually go and hang out to downtown House of Pizza after this talk. Since we're finishing a little early, we're going to stay here until like 8:05 or 8:10. Feel free to network with each other and hang out. And like in about maybe 15 minutes. Yeah, in about 15 minutes, we all going to leave and we're going to go to downtown House of Pizza. For the ones that are not familiar, it's the little courtyard that is in downtown. We usually sit back there. There's pizza, there's tacos, there's different bars and different restaurants. So we all just gonna meet there. And thank you for coming. We will see you next month. Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you for coming. We're gonna close the room now.